Have you ever lain awake in a hospital bed the night before surgery, staring at the ceiling tiles, counting them one by one, just to stop yourself from thinking about the real question? Not whether you'd survive the operation. No, the real question was simpler than that, and so much more painful. Who will be there when I wake up? I asked myself that question on the night of March the 4th, in room 214 of Mercy General Hospital in Columbus, Ohio. I was 67 years old. I had a hip replacement scheduled for 7 in the morning, and I was completely, utterly alone. My name is Vivienne Holt. I spent 41 years as a high school English teacher, raised one son mostly by myself after my husband Gerald passed when our boy was just 9, and built what I believed was a good life, a honest life. I had a house on Clover Street that I'd paid off myself, a retirement account I'd been careful with, and a son, my Mitchell, who I had poured every last drop of myself into raising right. I tell you this not to make you feel sorry for me. I tell you this because I want you to understand exactly what kind of woman I am. I am not a complainer. I am not someone who asks for much. I taught teenagers how to find meaning in literature for over 4 decades. I know how stories are supposed to go. I know that sacrifice is supposed to mean something, but sometimes life doesn't read the way you wrote it. The hip had been getting worse since the previous autumn. My orthopedic surgeon, Dr. Adaeze Okafor, had been patient with me. Lord knows he had been. But by February he sat me down and said very gently, "Mrs. Holt, if we don't do this now, we're going to be looking at a wheelchair by summer." I was stubborn about it. I didn't want to be a burden. I didn't want to ask anyone for anything. Mitchell lived 40 minutes away in Westerville with his wife Cheryl. They had a nice house, a good life. He worked in insurance. She worked in real estate. They were busy people. I understood that. I had always understood that. When I called him to tell him about the surgery date, he didn't hesitate. "Of course, Mom," he said. "Of course I'll be there. Don't even think about it." I remember sitting at my kitchen table after that call, feeling something loosen in my chest. Something I hadn't even realized was tight. I wouldn't be alone. My Mitchell would be there. I called him again the week before, just to confirm. He told me Cheryl's sister was coming in from Phoenix, and there might be some conflict with her schedule, but he would work it out. He told me not to worry. I called once more the day before I was admitted. He didn't pick up. I left a voicemail. He texted back 2 hours later. "Everything's fine, Mom. I'll be there." I checked in to Mercy General at 5:30 in the morning on March 4th. The admitting nurse, a young woman named Terry, with a cheerful ponytail and a voice like warm tea, asked me if I had anyone coming to wait for me during surgery. "My son is on his way," I told her. She smiled and wrote it down. They prepped me. Dr. Kapoor came in, initialed my hip with a marker the way surgeons do, patted my hand. The anesthesiologist explained what he'd be doing. Everyone was kind. Everyone was professional. And in that last half hour before they wheeled me back, I kept looking at the door. Mitchell did not come. I went into surgery alone. I woke up alone. The recovery nurse, a compact, no-nonsense woman with close-cropped silver hair, told me it had gone beautifully. She asked if my family had been updated. "I'm not sure," I said. My mouth tasted like metal. My hip was a distant, pressing ache. "Has anyone come to ask about me?" She checked. She came back. "No one's checked in at the desk, honey." I nodded. I looked at the ceiling tiles again. There were 22 of them in my section of the recovery room. They moved me to my room around noon. The afternoon nurse, who came on shift, who would end up meaning more to me than I can adequately express in words, knocked on my door frame around 2 o'clock and introduced herself. Her name was Adaeze Okafor. She was maybe 35, with a calm, steady manner and the most observant eyes I've ever seen on a person. She took my vitals, adjusted my IV, and then she paused. "Is there anything I can get you, Mrs. Holt? Anyone you'd like me to call?" "My son was supposed to be here," I heard myself say. I hadn't meant to say it. It just fell out. It's traffic maybe. Or something came up. Adaeze looked at me for a moment. Not with pity, I want to make that clear. It wasn't pity. It was the look of someone who sees you clearly and isn't going to pretend otherwise. "Would you like me to try his number for you?" "No," I said. "He'll come." He didn't come that afternoon. I called him myself at 4:30. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I called Cheryl's cell. She picked up on the second ring, which told me everything. "Oh, Vivienne," she said. And the way she said it, that soft exhale, that slight impatience she always hid behind a layer of sweetness, told me she'd been expecting this call. "Mitchell's been in back-to-back meetings all day. It's just been one of those weeks, you know how it gets." "Cheryl," I said. "I had surgery this morning. I've been awake for 9 hours. I'm alone in a hospital room." A pause. "Well, you're in good hands there, right? The nurses." I hung up. I am not proud of that, but I hung up. Adaeze came back at 5 to check my drain and bring my evening medication. She found me sitting up in bed, staring at the window, the phone in my lap. She didn't say anything at first. She just did her job, efficient and quiet. Then she pulled the chair close to the bed and sat down. "Tell me about yourself," she said. "Not your hip. Not your son. Tell me something you love." I stared at her. In 30 years of being a patient at various doctors' offices and hospitals, no one had ever asked me that. "Books," I said, after a moment. "What kind?" And we talked for 40 minutes. We talked about Toni Morrison and Barbara Kingsolver. We talked about the way a good novel can make you feel less alone in the world. Adaeze told me she'd been a literature major before switching to nursing, that she still read a novel a week on her commute. We talked until her charge nurse knocked on the door and reminded her she had other patients. She squeezed my hand before she left. "You're not alone tonight, Mrs. Holt," she said. "I mean that practically. I'm here till 11. You need anything, you press that call button, and I'm walking in that door." Mitchell called at 9:45 that night. I was half asleep. "Mom, I'm so sorry. It's been a day from hell. I was going to come, but Cheryl's sister's thing ran long, and then the traffic on 270. "Mitchell," I said. "Yeah, I'm going to sleep now. I'll come tomorrow, first thing, I promise." "Good night, Mitchell." I lay in the dark for a long time after that. I thought about the 9-year-old boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who held my hand at his father's funeral without me asking him to, who wrote me a letter for Mother's Day when he was 12, that I kept in a cedar box in my closet for 22 years. I thought about the man that boy had become, somewhere along the way, without me quite noticing when the change had happened. Then, I thought about Adaeze Okafor, who had sat in that chair and asked me what I loved, like it was the most natural thing in the world to ask. The next 3 days she was on shift. She stopped by more than her duties required. She brought me a copy of The Warmth of Other Suns from the hospital's small library cart, because I mentioned I'd never read it. She remembered that I took my tea without sugar. On the third evening, when the physical therapist had pushed me harder than I was ready for, and I was struggling not to cry, Adaeze sat with me and just said, "You can be angry. You did something hard today. You're allowed." Mitchell came on the second afternoon for 2 hours. He was distracted. He checked his phone 3 times. He brought flowers, a gas station bouquet, yellow and slightly wilted, and set them on the windowsill and told me I looked great. I did not look great. I had just started walking 12 steps with a walker, and I was exhausted down to my marrow. "You seem like you're in good hands," he said on his way out, gesturing at the nurse's station in the hallway. "Yes," I said, "I am." He hugged me carefully, the way you hug someone you're a little afraid of, and he left. On my last morning, the day of discharge, Adaeze wasn't scheduled, but she came in anyway, on her day off, in regular clothes, to help me get ready and wait with me while the discharge paperwork was processed. She'd arranged with a colleague to cover her parking spot. She brought coffee, real coffee, from the place down the block, not the burned hospital stuff. "You didn't have to do this," I told her. "I know," she said simply. My friend Roberta Sims, my oldest friend, who I've known since we were both 24 and teaching at the same schools, picked me up. Message arrived. She'd offered the moment I'd told her about the surgery, and I'd turned her down because I'd believed Mitchell would be there. When I finally called her on the second night, she said, "Vivienne Holt, I am going to pretend you didn't wait this long to call me, and I am going to be there Thursday morning at 10 sharp." She was there at 9:45. Roberta took one look at Adaeze, standing there with my discharge papers and a bag of my belongings, and she grabbed that young woman's hand with both of hers and said, "God bless you, sweetheart." Adaeze smiled and said it was just her job. Roberta and I both knew better. I spent 6 weeks recovering at home. Roberta came by 3 times a week, sometimes more. Mitchell came once. He called more than he came, And our calls were short and careful, full of things neither of us said. I had a lot of time to think during those 6 weeks. I thought about a conversation I'd had with my attorney, Howard Gaines, back when I'd first drafted my will. I had been straightforward about it. Everything went to Mitchell. The house, the retirement accounts, the savings, everything I'd built over a lifetime of careful work. It had seemed obvious at the time. He was my only child. Of course, it all went to Mitchell. I had Howard's number in my phone. I looked at it on a Tuesday afternoon in April, sitting in my recliner with my leg elevated, watching the light move across the living room floor. I looked at it for a long time. I called him the next day. "Howard," I said, "I need to talk to you about my will." He came to the house the following week. We sat at my kitchen table the same way we'd sat there 8 years earlier when I'd first drawn the document up. He was a careful man, Howard Gaines, methodical in the way of someone who had seen too many families tear themselves apart over money to have any illusions left. He listened to everything I said. He asked a few clarifying questions. He did not tell me what to do. What I told him was this: I wanted to establish a trust. The trust would fund a specific purpose. A purpose that had been forming in my mind during those weeks of recovery, slowly and then all at once, the way understanding sometimes arrives. I would leave the house to the trust. A portion of my retirement accounts as well. And I wanted to make a direct bequest, a significant immediate gift, to Adaeze Okafor. Howard looked up from his legal pad. "To the nurse?" "To Adaeze Okafor," I said. "Yes." He nodded slowly. "And Mitchell?" "Mitchell will receive $20,000, I said. Which is $20,000 more than he gave me when I needed him. I want to be honest about something. I wasn't doing this from rage. I've thought about this many times, and I want to be clear with myself and with you. I was not a woman scorned, shaking a fist. What I felt, sitting at that kitchen table, was more like a profound and quiet clarity. I had spent my whole life believing that blood was the organizing principle, that family was the container into which everything poured. What those 6 weeks had shown me was that the container isn't what holds you. The people who show up are what hold you. Adaeze had shown up, without being asked, without expecting anything. On her day off with real coffee. Mitchell had not. I couldn't pretend anymore that these two things were equal, or that rewriting my will would somehow make them equal. The will was just paper. It was just my attempt to tell the truth in the one document where I was legally required to mean what I said. I had Howard track down Adaeze's contact information through proper channels. I wrote her a letter first, explaining what I wanted to do, giving her the option to decline. I told her I understood if it felt strange. I told her she owed me nothing, and that this decision was entirely mine. She called me 3 days after receiving the letter. She was quiet for a long moment on the phone, and then she said, "Mrs. Holt, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," I told her. "You already said it when you asked me what I loved." She cried a little. "I did too, though I'll admit it only to you. The trust, that was the other part, the part that had come to me slowly and then all at once. I'd been a teacher for 41 years. I'd watched students come and go, hundreds and hundreds of them, and over the years a pattern I could not unsee. The ones who struggled most were often the ones dealing with something at home. A parent who was sick, a grandparent who needed care, a family stretched too thin. Elder care was a crisis in this country, and it was mostly invisible. The people who bore the weight of it were mostly women, mostly underpaid, mostly unrecognized. I wanted to do something about that. In my small way. In the way one retired English teacher from Columbus, Ohio could do something. I called the trust the Clover Street Foundation. After the street I'd lived on for 30 years, the house I'd paid off myself, the porch where I'd sat and graded papers in the evenings, the garden I'd kept because it made me feel like I was still making something grow, the Clover Street Foundation would fund respite care for elderly people in Franklin County who couldn't afford it. Temporary, professional, in-home care so that the people who looked after them could breathe, could rest, could remain. It would fund training programs for home health aides, and it would include a scholarship. The Adaeze Okafor Scholarship, I decided, though I hadn't told her that part yet, for nursing students from first-generation college families. Howard drafted everything. It took several weeks. During that time, I did not tell Mitchell. He found out in June, when I invited him to the house for dinner. I want to tell you that I rehearsed what I would say. I stood at the stove that afternoon, stirring a pot of beef stew, and I went over it in my head. I would be calm. I would be kind. I would not be cruel. I would simply tell him the truth. He arrived with Cheryl. I had expected that. She was dressed as she always was. Carefully, expensively, in a way that communicated she'd made an effort without appearing to make one. They brought wine. Cheryl kissed my cheek and said I looked wonderful. Mitchell hugged me, more warmly than at the hospital, and asked if there was anything he could do to help. We sat down to dinner. We talked about ordinary things, his work, the weather, a vacation they were planning to Portland. I asked about their dog. I listened. I ate my stew. After I cleared the dishes, I set Howard's summary letter on the table between us. I've updated my will, I said. I wanted you to hear about it from me, in person. I thought you deserved that. Mitchell looked at the letter, then at me. What do you mean updated? I've established a foundation, I said. The Clover Street Foundation. The house and a portion of my retirement savings will fund it. It will provide respite care and nursing scholarships here in Franklin County. Cheryl reached for the letter first. Mitchell let her take it. And the bequest to me? He asked carefully. $20,000, I said, which I hope you'll use well. The silence that followed was the longest of my life. I have taught hundreds of students how to sit with silence on the page, how the space between words carries meaning. And I had never understood that quite so viscerally as I did at my own kitchen table. Mitchell's face did something complicated. He looked at Cheryl, then at me, then at the table. Mom, he said. I know I wasn't there the way I should have been. I know that. I know you know, I said. Is this about the surgery? It's about everything, I said. It's about 40 years of everything. But yes, the surgery is part of it. Cheryl started to say something. I could see her organizing herself for an argument, and Mitchell put his hand on her arm. She stopped. That surprised me. It was the first time I'd seen him do that. Tell me about the foundation, he said. So I did. I told him about the respite care program, the training fund, the scholarship. I told him about the women and men in this county who were running themselves into the ground caring for aging parents, spouses, neighbors, without a single resource to catch them when they fell. I told him about Adaeze, what she'd done, why she deserved to be honored. I talked for 20 minutes without stopping. When I finished, Mitchell was quiet for a long moment. The scholarship named after her, he said. That's something, Mom. She earned it. He nodded. There was something moving across his face that I hadn't seen there in a long time. Not guilt, though that was there too. Something older. Something that looked, if I let myself believe it, a little like the 9-year-old boy at his father's funeral. I'm sorry, he said. I know that doesn't change the will. I know it doesn't fix anything. But I'm sorry. I keep telling myself I was busy, and I was, but that's not a good enough answer. I knew what was happening and I chose something easier. That's the truth of it. He'd never said anything that honest to me in his adult life. I didn't know what to do with it, so I just sat with it for a moment, the way I used to tell my students to sit with a difficult passage. I forgive you, Mitchell, I said, and I meant it. I genuinely meant it, the way you only can when you've already done the grieving. I do. But forgiving you and pretending it didn't happen are two different things. You understand the difference. He looked at me steadily. Yeah, he said, I do. Cheryl was quiet through all of this. At some point during my explaining the foundation, she had set down her defensive posture, or at least I felt her do it. There was a shift in the room, subtle, the way the temperature changes just before rain. She didn't apologize, but she asked carefully whether the foundation accepted volunteers. I told her I'd find out. They left at 9. Mitchell hugged me at the door, and it was different from the hospital hug. Less careful, less afraid. Just a hug. I stood on the porch afterward and listened to the neighborhood. A dog somewhere, a screen door. The ordinary sounds of a Tuesday evening in Columbus in June. The Clover Street Foundation held its first board meeting in September. Roberta Sims is on the board. Howard Gaines sits in as legal counsel. Adaeze Okafor is also on the board. She was moved when I asked her, and argued that she wasn't qualified. And I told her that a person who sits with a stranger in a hospital room, and asks what she loves is exactly the kind of person who belongs in a room making decisions about how to take care of people. The first cohort of scholarship recipients was announced in October. 3 first-generation nursing students from Franklin County, 2 women and 1 young man, all of them remarkable. We held a small reception at the Columbus Metropolitan Library. I wore the blue dress I'd been saving for something I couldn't yet name. Adaeze came. She stood in front of the board listing the scholarship in her name for a long time without saying anything. And then she turned to me and said, "You know this is going to make me cry every single time I see it." "Good," I told her. "That means it's real." Mitchell came too, which I had not expected but found I was glad about. He shook hands with Howard, introduced himself to the scholarship recipients, and spent a long time talking to one of the young women, a 22-year-old named Adaeze, who was working 2 jobs and raising a toddler while completing her first year of nursing school. I watched him from across the room, this man who was my son, this complicated and failing and sometimes trying person I had loved since before he was born, and I thought, we're not finished yet. I don't know what we are, but we're not finished. I am 68 years old now. My hip is healed. I walk without a cane, mostly on good days. I tend my garden on Clover Street, and I read a novel a week, and I show up to every board meeting of the Clover Street Foundation because I believe, deeply and without apology, that showing up is the whole thing. That it always has been. Adaeze and I have coffee once a month. We trade book recommendations. Last week, she told me she'd started reading poetry, which delighted me in a way I can't fully explain. Only that it felt like something being passed forward, the way the best things sometimes are. I don't tell this story to make you think I'm a remarkable woman. I tell it because I think there are a lot of people sitting alone in hospital rooms right now, counting ceiling tiles, waiting for someone who isn't coming. And I want them to know that it is possible. Even at 68, even after the life is mostly lived, to look clearly at what you have and what you owe and who you are, and to decide, quietly and without drama, to tell the truth. The will is just paper. But the Clover Street Foundation is real. The scholarship is real. The coffee with Adaeze is real. And on the nights when the hip aches, and the house is quiet, and I think about all the things I cannot change, I hold on to the thing that is most real of all. That when I needed someone to sit beside me and ask what I loved, she came through that door.